So this is the final key area of the National 5 course, and it's called Variation and Inheritance. So this topic is all about how the genetic information that we have from our mum and dad goes on to make us who we are. So the first part, the first video in this key area is all about species and variation, and then we'll go on to have a wee look at inheritance, so how our genetic information makes us who we are. All right, so in this video, we're going to look at what a species is, what we mean by the word variation, the types, two types of variation, examples of those types, and then a brief look at how genes control the different types of variation. So, what would you say is the definition of a species? So having a look at these two organisms, are they the same species? Well, one of them is actually a donkey. The one on the left was a donkey, and the one on the right is a horse, a female horse. Now, put the two of them together, give them enough time, and reproduction will take place. And what we end up with is this unusual offspring at the bottom, which we call a mule. Now, this mule is neither horse nor donkey. It is what we call a hybrid. And that hybrid cannot go on to have children of its own. It is infertile. So, donkeys are a species. Horses are a species, but they are not the same species. No matter how much there might be some similarities between the two, they are two different species. And the reason we know that is because they cannot breed to produce fertile offspring. They can produce infertile offspring, which is not a member of either species. It's a hybrid. Let's have a look at another example here. So here we have two toads. These are members of the same species. They can go on to produce a fertile toad as their offspring. So these are all members of the same species. Here we have two frogs. They can go on to produce a fertile frog, fertile offspring. So these are all members of the same species. However, the toad and the frog, because they are different species, they cannot produce fertile offspring. They may be able to produce some kind of infertile hybrid, but it is not a member of either species. It is a hybrid. Okay, so the definition of a species is that members, these are organisms that are able to go on to produce fertile offspring. Okay. So why don't we see many hybrids about? So these are two really unusual hybrids. So we've got a zorse, or it's sometimes called a zebrorse, and we've got a liger. Any idea what species produced these two hybrids? So the liger here is produced from, it's the offspring of a lion and a tiger. The zebrorse or zorse is produced from a horse and a zebra. But why don't we see many of these in the world? Well, the reason is that they are infertile. That means that they cannot have children of their own. So the only way that we can get more ligers is to go back to our two actual species, a lion and a tiger. Similarly, zebrors, we would need to go back to a zebra and a horse. The only way to produce these offspring, these hybrids, is from the original species, because they cannot have children of their own. All right, but even within a species, we see quite a lot of variation. So if we have a look at the children that you can see in that picture, they are all members of the same species. They are all human beings, Homo sapiens, all members of the same species. But there are a lot of differences that we can see there, and some that we may not be able to see. So things like hair color, hair shape, things like skin color, things like size of their feet, size of their hands, their heights, their weights. These are all differences. These are all variations within this species. And we see this idea of variation in every species on Earth. We spoke about variation in the evolution topic and how it's really important, because that's what ensures that we're not all exactly the same. We have different strengths, different weaknesses, and it's the strengths that help drive evolution. So these are all members of the same species, but we can see there are hugely different colorings on these shells. Dogs are a fantastic example. There is a massive amount of variation within the dog species. Some are massive, some are very, very small, but the idea is that any dog, regardless of how it looks, in theory, it can then go on to reproduce with another dog, regardless of how it looks. So this is just variation, but they are all members of the same species. All right. The two types of variation that we can see, we can split them up into two different categories, which we call discrete and continuous. So discrete variation, this is the type of variation that can be placed into distinct groups. So if you think about all the members of your family or all of your friends, and we can think about types of variation that we can group into just a few different types. So a good example of this is eye color. So if we consider eye color, there are generally only a small number of colors that people can have. Okay. Another really good example of this is the ability to roll our tongue. So some people can do it and some people cannot. There are only two versions of this gene, the tongue rolling gene. We can or we can't. Another good example of it might be to do with the shape of your ear. So some people have what we call an attached earlobe or a detached earlobe. Again, only two forms of this gene, this single gene. So we call that discrete variation. Continuous variation is where we can't place people into groups, like if we consider eye color, green, blue, hazel, brown, or tongue rolling, can, can't. In continuous variation, these are traits where we can't group people because the characteristics vary gradually, and there's usually a really big range of differences. So the best example of that would be height. It's not correct to say small, tall. We can actually measure height. And because we can measure it, it gives us a huge range. Another example might be a person's hand span or their weight. These are things where there is not just one or two possibilities. There are a huge range of possibilities, and again, they're measurable. So continuous variation, not in distinct groups, huge range of differences. And the other important thing is that the reason for that is that these traits or characteristics are not controlled by a single gene. They are controlled by lots of genes. And that is what we mean by polygenic. Okay, so polygenic characteristics or polygenic traits, these are controlled by many genes, not just one gene. We'll come back to this theme later on in the next video. All right, what I'd like you to do is I want you to have a wee look at all of the different characteristics that are in this big table. And I'd like you to try and decide if they are discrete variation, examples of discrete variation, where it's small groups or small number of possibilities. And then I want you to think about the ones that are continuous variation, where there's a wide range. Now you could do this by just writing down a table and put discrete on one side, continuous on the other, and then put each of these examples under one of those headings. So pause the video, give that a go, and then we'll look at the answers. All right, so here are the answers then. So they are slightly different in color. You maybe want to have a wee think about why that might be. So skin color in humans, hair color in humans, these are examples of continuous variation. Have a look at the ones that are colored in yellow. These are examples of discrete variation. So things like earlobe type, attached or unattached, tongue rolling, seed shape in garden pea plants, the eye colors in fruit flies are fingerprint types on one finger. There are only a limited number of types. Coat colour of guinea pigs, flower colour in foxglove plants, whether we're left or right-handed, colour of grain in maize, all of these are examples of discrete variation. The pink ones are body mass, lengths of fingers, hand spans, milk yields, resting heart rate, length of petals and daisy flowers, body length and trout. These ones and the white ones are examples of continuous variation. The last one, accent, is actually not a result of genes at all. It's not genetic, it's a learned behavior. So this one is neither discrete nor continuous. Even though we do have different accents, it has got nothing to do with genes or genetics. And that is it for this video. So you should now be able to state what a species is, state what variation is, and name the two types of variation. And you should also be able to give examples of both types, discrete and continuous. So you can stop the video, and in the next video, we're going to have a look at how these examples, these different characteristics, are actually controlled by our genes.